The fire in the great hall had not yet died when Cale Ashgrove stood before every pack member, gathered under the stone arches, and said the words that would break Elena Voss forever. His voice did not shake. That was the part she would remember most, long after the pain of the bond snapping inside her chest had faded into something duller and more permanent. He did not shake when he said it. I reject you as my mate. 5 words. 5 words to erase what the moon had chosen only hours before. Elena stood in the center of the hall, still wearing the pale ceremonial dress from the blood moon binding, still feeling the warmth of his hands where they had held hers under the open sky. The elders had chanted the old words. The bond had settled between them like a golden thread stitched into her ribs. She had felt whole for the first time in her life. Now she felt the thread being torn out by the root. Around her, the pack members who had cheered for the new match hours earlier now looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Some looked satisfied. She recognized their faces. They belonged to the Draven line, the family that had wanted a different alliance for their king, one that would bring land and soldiers rather than a girl from a struggling border pack with no name worth mentioning in the old records. Elena searched Cale's face for some sign that this was a trick, a test, anything other than the truth. His jaw was tight. His golden eyes, the eyes that had looked at her with such warmth under the moon, were now flat and distant, fixed somewhere over her shoulder, as if she had already become a stranger to him. Behind him stood Silas Draven, arms crossed, a faint and satisfied curve at the corner of his mouth. Elena understood then. This was not Cale's choice alone. This was the price of a crown that came with too many hands gripping it. She did not beg. She would not give Silas Draven the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. Instead, she straightened her spine, the way her mother had taught her before her mother died defending their small border territory from raiders 3 winters ago. She looked at Cale one final time. If that is your will, my king, she said, then I release you from any claim. Her voice cracked only once, on the last word. She turned before anyone could see what that crack cost her, and she walked out of the hall with her head high, past the rows of wolves who had gathered to witness the great alliance, and now witnessed its ruin instead. Outside, the night air hit her like cold water. She kept walking. She walked past the training grounds where she had sparred as a girl, past the healer's cabin where she had been born, past the old oak tree where Cale had once found her crying after her mother's death, and sat with her in silence until dawn, saying nothing, simply staying. That memory nearly broke her composure more than the rejection itself. She did not stop walking until the territory line was behind her, and the scent of pine gave way to unfamiliar trees. Elena Voss left everything she had ever known that night. She left her small cabin near the northern fence. She left the 2 younger wolves she had trained in tracking, boys who had looked up to her like an older sister. She left the graves of her parents, unmarked, because their pack had never been wealthy enough for proper stones. She left the man she had loved since she was 16 years old, and had finally, briefly, been allowed to call her mate. She did not look back once. For 3 days, she traveled south, moving only at night, sleeping in short stretches beneath fallen logs and behind boulders, avoiding any scent trail that might belong to a wolf. She had grown up being taught how to vanish. Her mother had been a tracker before her, and trackers knew how to erase themselves from the world when necessary. Elena used every skill she had been given to make sure that no one from the Ashgrove territory could follow her, not even if they wanted to, which she doubted anyone would. On the 4th day, she reached the edge of a small human town called Brindlefall, tucked between 2 low mountain ranges far from any wolf territory marked on the old maps. She had heard of towns like this from traders who passed through packland, places where humans lived, without knowing what moved in the shadows around them, places where a wolf could disappear into an ordinary life if she was careful enough. She was careful. She cut her hair short with a hunting knife. She bought plain clothes with the few coins she had sewn into the lining of her cloak. She told anyone who asked that her name was Elena Marsh, a widow from the eastern coast looking for quiet work. No one questioned a quiet woman in a mining town where half the population had come from somewhere else, running from something else. She found work at a bakery owned by an older woman named Nadia Pierce, kneading dough before dawn and selling bread to miners before the sun was fully up. The work was hard on hands that had once held a hunting bow more often than a rolling pin, but it was honest, and it asked nothing of her except effort. For the first time since the rejection, Elena found small stretches of the day when she did not think about golden eyes going flat and distant. It was in the 6th week that she noticed something was wrong with her body. She had trained her senses since childhood to notice every shift, every change, every signal her body sent her. She noticed the fatigue first, deeper than the bakery work should have caused. Then the strange aversion to the smell of yeast that had never bothered her before. Then, one gray morning, standing over the wash basin, her stomach turned so violently that she had to grip the edge of the counter to stay upright. Nadia found her there, pale and shaking, and without a word, without judgment, brought her a cup of ginger tea and sat with her until the sickness passed. "You are carrying," Nadia said gently, once Elena's breathing had steadied. "I have seen this sickness before, many times." Elena did not answer right away. She sat very still, feeling the truth settle over her the way cold water settles over stone, slow and complete and impossible to deny. A child, Cale's child, conceived on the one night the bond had been whole between them, before it was torn apart in front of the entire pack. She pressed a hand to her stomach, and for a moment, something other than grief moved through her, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Then the fear arrived, colder and sharper than anything she had felt since the night of the rejection. If this child was hers, and Cale's, it was not simply hers. By the old laws of the wolf packs, any child born of a bonded pair, even a pair whose bond had been publicly severed, carried royal blood. If Silas Draven or anyone loyal to him ever learned that Elena carried the true heir to the Ashgrove throne, they would not hesitate to end that threat before it could grow old enough to walk. Elena thought of her mother's final stand at the border, fighting to protect a territory that had never truly protected her family in return. She thought of Cale's flat golden eyes in the great hall, refusing to meet hers, as he said the words that ended everything between them. She thought of a child who did not yet exist outside her own body, already burdened with a war it had not chosen. She made her decision in the quiet of that small kitchen, with the smell of ginger tea still on her tongue, and Nadia's steady hand resting on her shoulder. No one would know. Not the pack. Not the council. Not Cale Ashgrove, who had chosen his crown over her in front of everyone who mattered. She would raise this child alone, far from wolf politics, far from thrones and bloodlines, and the golden eyes that haunted her sleep. She would give her son or daughter an ordinary life, safe from the dangers that came with being royal, safe from a father who had proven, in one cold sentence, exactly how much their bond had been worth to him. Nadia asked no questions that morning beyond what Elena wanted to share, only offered her a place to stay above the bakery for as long as she needed it, and work that would not disappear when her belly grew too large for the counter. Elena accepted with a gratitude she did not have words for. That night, alone in the small room above the bakery, Elena allowed herself, for the first time since the rejection, to cry. She cried for her mother, gone too soon. She cried for the girl she had been under the blood moon, believing for one perfect hour that she had finally found somewhere she belonged. She cried for the man she had loved and the king who had destroyed her in his place. And she cried for the child growing inside her, who would never know a father's face, who would grow up believing that royal blood and broken hearts were simply stories from a life their mother had left behind. She did not know, as she pressed both hands over her stomach and finally let herself sleep, that far to the north, in a stone hall that had gone quiet since her departure, Cale Ashgrove had not slept at all. He sat alone by the dying fire long after the others had gone, staring at the space where she had stood, replaying the 5 words he had spoken until they felt like stones in his throat. He told himself it had been necessary. The alliance with the Draven line secured the northern border against raiders, who had grown bolder every winter. Silas Draven had made the terms plain enough. Reject the border girl, marry into a bloodline the council trusted, or watch his own council turn against him, in a season when the pack could least afford division. He told himself Elena would understand, in time, that a king did not always get to choose with his heart. He did not yet know that his heart had chosen anyway, in a way that could never be undone, and that somewhere far south of his territory, the proof of that choice was already growing beneath a woman's steady hands, hidden from every eye that might have wished it harm. The fire finally burned to embers. Cale remained in the great hall, until dawn broke gray and cold over the mountains, And when Bram Wolcott, his oldest advisor, and the only man in that hall who had not smiled the night before, finally came to find him, he said only one thing. "You let them take something from you tonight that you will spend the rest of your life trying to get back." Cale did not answer. He simply stood, walked to the window, and watched the sun rise over a territory that suddenly felt far too large and far too empty, though he could not yet have said why. 7 years passed in Brindlefall, the way years pass in towns built on hard work and short memories, one season folding into the next, until the mountains wore snow, and shed it again, more times than anyone cared to count. Elena Voss, known to everyone around her simply as Elena Marsh, had become a fixture of the town, respected for her steady hands and her honest prices, though the miners' wives sometimes whispered that there was something unusual about the quiet woman who ran the bakery with Nadia Pierce, something in the way she moved through a room, like she was always listening for danger that never seemed to come. Her son, Rowan, was the reason for that watchfulness. From the moment he could walk, Rowan had been different in ways Elena worked hard to hide. He ran faster than boys twice his age. He healed from scraped knees and cut fingers in a single night instead of a week. His hearing caught sounds from the far edge of town that no ordinary child should have noticed, and more than once, Elena had found him standing perfectly still in the bakery doorway, head tilted, listening to something only he could hear, long before the wagon that carried it into town had even come over the hill. She taught him control the way her mother had once taught her, though she stripped away every mention of packs, thrones, and bloodlines. She simply told him he was special, that his gifts made him strong, and that strength required discipline, patience, and quiet. Rowan, curious and clever, accepted this the way children accept most things their mothers tell them, without question, though as he grew older the questions began to form anyway, the way they always do. "Why do my eyes change color when I am angry, Mother?" he asked one evening, only 6 years old, sitting on the small wooden stool by the hearth, while Elena mended a torn shirt. Elena's needle paused for only a heartbeat before she answered. "Because you carry something old inside you," she said carefully. "Something powerful. It makes you different from other children, but different is not the same as wrong. You must simply learn to hold it steady, the way you hold a candle, so the flame does not catch the curtains." Rowan considered this with the serious expression he wore far too often for a child his age, then nodded and returned to his wooden carving, apparently satisfied for the moment. Elena returned to her mending, though her hands were not as steady as they had been before the question. She knew this conversation would not be the last of its kind. Each year, Rowan grew stronger, and each year, the effort of teaching him to hide what he was grew harder, like trying to keep a rising tide behind a wall built from sand. He had already twice lifted objects far too heavy for a child his size when startled or frightened, once catching a falling shelf of flour sacks that would have crushed a younger boy from the miller's family who had wandered too close to the bakery storeroom. Elena had made him promise never to do such a thing where others could see, and Rowan, frightened by the look on her face, had agreed, though she could tell the promise cost him something. He was a good boy. Kind to smaller children, patient with the elderly widow who lived above the tailor's shop and often needed help carrying water, quick to defend anyone he saw being treated unfairly by the older boys, who sometimes gathered near the mill to test their strength on weaker targets. But Elena watched him with a mother's careful eye, and saw, more and more, the shape of someone she had once loved and lost, someone with golden eyes and a quiet strength that drew others toward him without effort. She never told Rowan his father's name. She told him only that his father had made a choice that kept them apart, and that the choice had nothing to do with anything Rowan had done, since he had not yet existed when it was made. Rowan accepted this, the way he accepted most difficult truths in his young life, with a solemn nod and a question tucked away for later, when he might be brave enough to ask it. Nadia Pierce had become something close to family in those 7 years, a grandmother in every way that mattered, though no blood connected them. She helped Elena watch over Rowan, covered for Elena's occasional need to disappear into the surrounding hills for a night when the pull of the moon grew too strong to safely ignore near-curious human neighbors, and never once asked the questions that Elena knew she must have wondered about. It was Nadia who taught Rowan his letters. It was Nadia who slipped him extra bread when he thought no one was looking. It was Nadia who, on the morning everything changed, was the first to notice the stranger standing at the edge of town, watching the bakery with far too much interest for an ordinary traveler. "She's got Rowan's coloring wrong in her memory of him," and needs to check twice, Nadia told Elena quietly that morning, setting down a tray of cooling bread, with hands that were not quite steady. There's a man out past the well, been standing there since sunrise, not buying anything, not asking directions. Just watching. Elena's blood went cold before she had even crossed the room to look through the front window. She recognized the posture immediately. The particular stillness of someone trained to track. Someone who had likely spent years learning to read scent and movement, the way ordinary humans read words on a page. She had once moved exactly that way herself, standing at the border of Ashgrove territory, waiting to see who or what might cross into land she was sworn to protect. "Keep Rowan in the back room," Elena said, her voice low and even despite the panic rising in her chest. "Do not let him near the front of the shop, not for any reason." Nadia did not question the order. She simply moved toward the back, where Rowan sat carving another small wooden animal. This one shaped roughly like a wolf, though Elena had never once told him what that particular animal meant to their family. Elena watched through the gap in the curtain as the stranger finally moved, walking with unhurried steps toward the well at the center of town, crouching briefly beside it, as though checking the water. Though Elena knew better, he was checking the ground, checking scent, checking for a trail that might lead him exactly where he intended to go. She had spent 7 years building walls around the small life she and Rowan shared in Brindlefall. She had told herself those walls were strong enough to hold. Watching the stranger straighten, turn, and look directly toward the bakery, with an expression of quiet certainty on his face, Elena understood, in one sick, sinking moment, that the walls had never been as strong as she believed. Someone had found them. And whoever they reported to next would determine whether the life she had built for her son would survive the season, or whether everything she had run from 7 years ago was about to catch up with both of them at once. The stranger did not approach the bakery that day. Instead, he took a room at the town's only inn, paid for 3 nights in advance, and spent his time walking the streets of Brindlefall with the unhurried patience of a man who had nowhere else to be. Elena recognized the strategy immediately. He was letting the town grow used to him. He was waiting for her guard to drop. She did not let it drop. For 2 days, she kept Rowan close, inventing reasons to keep him inside the bakery, rather than out playing near the mill with the other children. Rowan, sharp as ever, noticed the change in his mother's behavior immediately. "Is something wrong?" he asked on the second evening, watching her check the lock on the back door for the 3rd time that hour. "Nothing you need to worry about," Elena answered, forcing calm into her voice. "I simply want you close while there are strangers in town." Rowan accepted this, though his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than a child's usually would, as though some part of him already sensed that his mother's careful world had begun to crack at the edges. On the 3rd night, Elena left Rowan sleeping under Nadia's watch and slipped out into the darkness to find the stranger herself. She would rather face the danger directly than wait for it to choose its own moment to strike. She found him exactly where her instincts told her he would be, seated on a fallen log at the edge of the tree line, just beyond the last house in town, facing the forest, as though waiting for her arrival. He did not startle when she stepped from the shadows. He simply turned his head and studied her with calm, measuring eyes, the color of wet stone. "You move well for a woman who has spent 7 years pretending to be human," he said. Elena kept her distance, every muscle ready to move if he made the wrong gesture. "Who sent you?" "No one sent me," he answered. "I came on my own business, tracking a rogue pack rumored to be moving through these hills. I did not expect to catch the scent of Ashgrove blood in a human bakery." Elena's stomach dropped, though she kept her expression steady through sheer force of will. "You are mistaken," she said. The man, who introduced himself only as Garrett Bly, a tracker who had once served the Ashgrove pack before choosing a quieter, wandering life away from court politics, shook his head slowly. "I served under the old Alpha before Kale took the throne," he said. "I know that bloodline scent the way I know my own hands. The boy in your bakery carries it clear as daylight. I am guessing, from the way you have hidden yourselves out here, that the king does not know he has a son." Elena's silence answered the question more clearly than any words could have. Garrett studied her for a long moment, and something in his weathered face softened slightly, though his voice stayed even. "I have no love for the Draven family," he said. "I left the pack partly because of the influence they hold over the throne. I do not intend to report this to anyone who would use it against the boy or his mother. But I will tell you this. Others will find what I found, eventually. Royal blood does not stay hidden forever, especially not blood as strong as what runs in that child. You would be wise to decide how you want the truth to come out, rather than let it be discovered by someone with less patience than me. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist that Garrett was wrong, that Rowan was simply her son and nothing more, but the tracker's steady gaze made clear that such denials would waste both their time. "What do you intend to do?" she asked instead. "Nothing, for now," Garrett answered, rising from the log. "I have no master to report to, and no interest in palace games. But I would not wait too long to make your own choice, Elena Voss. Word travels faster than either of us would like, especially in a season when the throne itself has grown unstable." "Unstable," Elena repeated, unable to keep the question from slipping out despite herself. Garrett's expression turned grim. "Cale Ashgrove has no heir," he said. "His marriage to Odette Marlowe, the alliance Silas Draven arranged in your place, has produced nothing in 7 years, and the healers whisper it never will. The pack grows restless. Some say the throne is cursed, that a rejected mate's sorrow has poisoned the bloodline. Silas Draven, meanwhile, grows bolder each season, positioning his own nephew as a possible successor should Cale fail to produce an heir of his own. Whatever waits for your son out there, Elena, it is not a peaceful kingdom. It is a throne, surrounded by wolves, circling for their own chance to claim it." Elena stood frozen in the darkness, long after Garrett Bly disappeared back toward the inn, his footsteps silent, in a way that only years of tracking could produce. She thought of Rowan asleep in the small room above the bakery, unaware that his very existence could unravel a kingdom he had never seen, could threaten a throne he had never wanted, could make him a target for men who valued power more than any child's safety. She thought of Cale, 7 years older now, trapped in a marriage that had brought him nothing, surrounded by a council that had used him as a tool, and would use his son the same way given the chance. For 7 years, she had told herself that keeping Rowan hidden was the only way to keep him safe. Standing at the edge of the forest, with Garrett Bly's warning still ringing in her ears, she understood for the first time that hiding might no longer be a choice she was allowed to make. She returned to the bakery before dawn, checked on Rowan sleeping peacefully in his small bed, and sat by the window until the sun rose, turning over every possible path forward, and finding no comfortable answer among them. 3 days later, Garrett Bly left Brindlefall as quietly as he had arrived, continuing whatever journey had brought him through the mountains in the first place. Elena allowed herself to hope, briefly, that his silence would hold, that his promise not to report what he had found would protect them a little longer. She did not know that Garrett Bly, despite his own convictions, had been followed the entire time by a second tracker, one who did not share his loyalty to quiet lives lived far from court, one who reported directly and eagerly to Silas Draven himself, hungry for whatever favor such information might buy him within the Draven household. Within the week, word of a boy bearing Ashgrove blood, hidden in a human town far to the south, reached Silas Draven's ears, and the wolf who had once forced a king to reject his own mate began, immediately and quietly, to plan how best to use this new information to secure his family's grip on the northern throne once and for all. Silas Draven did not go to Cale Ashgrove first. He went to his own nephew, a cold and ambitious young wolf named Lucian Vale, and together, they began weighing how the discovery of a hidden heir might be turned to their advantage, rather than treated as a threat to be reported honestly. "If the boy is truly of Ashgrove blood," Lucian said one evening in his uncle's private study, "the council will demand he be recognized as heir the moment word spreads. That undoes everything we have built these 7 years." Silas Draven, older and far more patient than his nephew, poured 2 cups of dark wine and considered the problem with the same careful calculation he applied to every matter that touched the throne. "Only if the boy survives long enough to be recognized," he said finally. Lucian's eyes sharpened with understanding, though he said nothing aloud, aware even in the privacy of his uncle's study that certain plans were safer left unspoken. Silas continued, thinking aloud as much as instructing. "We will not move carelessly. The tracker who first found the boy has already vanished back into the hills, uninterested in politics. Good. That means we have time before the wider pack learns anything. We will send our own people, quietly, to confirm the bloodline beyond doubt. and to assess how well the mother and child are protected. Only then will we decide the safest path forward for our family's interests." He did not say the word he meant. He did not need to. Lucian understood exactly what his uncle intended, and though a small, uneasy part of him hesitated at the idea of moving against a child, ambition proved, as it so often did in the Draven bloodline, stronger than conscience. While the Draven family plotted in the shadows, Cale Ashgrove sat through another long, silent evening meal with his wife, Odette Marlowe, in a dining hall that had grown colder over the years, despite the fires that burned in every corner. Odette was not a cruel woman. She had simply never wanted this marriage any more than Cale had, forced into it by her own family's ambitions in much the same way Cale had been forced by the council's demands. They had built a functional, distant partnership over the years, cordial in public, hollow in private, both of them aware that whatever the throne required of them, love had never been part of the arrangement. "You look tired," Odette said, setting down her cup without much interest in the observation. "I am always tired," Cale answered, and neither of them pursued the conversation further. After the meal, Cale retreated to the same window in the great hall where he had once watched dawn break over a territory that had felt suddenly too large and too empty. 7 years had not softened that feeling. If anything, it had grown heavier, settling into his bones, the way old grief eventually does. No longer sharp, but never fully gone. Bram Wolcott found him there, as he often did on nights when sleep would not come. "The council grows restless again," Bram said, joining Cale at the window. "Silas Draven has been unusually quiet these past weeks. That silence troubles me more than his usual scheming ever did." Cale's jaw tightened at the mention of the name, though 7 years of practiced control kept his voice level. "Let him plot. There is little left for him to take from me that he has not already taken." Bram studied his king for a long moment, the way he had studied him countless times over the years, watching a strong, capable leader slowly hollow himself out from the inside over a choice he had never wanted to make and had never fully forgiven himself for making. "You never asked what became of her," Bram said quietly. "Not once. In 7 years." Cale's hands tightened on the stone windowsill until his knuckles paled. "There was no purpose in asking," he said. "I made my choice. Chasing after what I gave up would only prove how little that choice was worth." Bram said nothing further that night, though the look he gave his king before leaving carried a weight that lingered long after the older wolf had gone. Cale remained at the window alone, as he so often did, staring out over a kingdom that felt, more with each passing year, like a crown he wore out of duty, rather than purpose. He did not know, standing there in the quiet dark, that far to the south, a boy with his own golden eyes was learning to carve small wooden wolves by candlelight, unaware that his father thought of him not at all, simply because he did not yet know he existed. He did not know that his own council, the men sworn to protect his throne, were already making quiet plans that would determine whether that boy lived long enough to ever learn his father's name. And he did not know that within the month, a piece of information would reach his ears that would shatter the careful numbness he had built around himself for 7 long years, and force him to face a truth far more complicated and far more dangerous than anything the Draven family had ever thrown at him before. 2 Draven scouts reached the outskirts of Brindlefall on a cold, overcast morning, moving with far less caution than Garrett Bly had shown weeks before. They did not care about staying hidden. They cared only about confirming what their master needed to know, and confirming it quickly. Elena noticed them within the hour. She had spent 7 years training her senses to catch exactly this kind of danger, and the moment she stepped outside the bakery and caught the unfamiliar scent of wolf, sharper and less patient than Garrett's had been, every instinct in her body went cold with alarm. These were not wanderers passing through. These were hunters, and something in the deliberate way they moved through town told her they already knew exactly what they were looking for. She found Nadia in the kitchen and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Take Rowan out the back way," she said. "Go to the Hendricks farm and stay there until I come for you. Do not question me, please." Nadia, who had never once seen Elena's calm composure crack so completely, did not argue. She gathered Rowan, now a tall and watchful boy of 7 who sensed immediately that something was deeply wrong, and slipped out through the back alley toward the edge of town. Rowan resisted only once, pulling against Nadia's hand as they reached the tree line. "I want to help my mother," he said, his young voice carrying a stubbornness that reminded Nadia, more than she wanted to admit in that moment, of the tracker's warning weeks earlier about the strength of the blood running through him. "Your mother needs you safe, more than she needs your help right now," Nadia told him firmly. And after a long moment, Rowan allowed himself to be led away, though his golden eyes kept glancing back toward the bakery until the trees blocked his view entirely. Elena, meanwhile, positioned herself at the bakery's front door, unwilling to let the scouts get anywhere near the path Rowan and Nadia had taken. When the two strangers finally approached, she met them in the street before they could reach the building at all. "You have wandered into the wrong town," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. The taller of the two scouts studied her with open calculation, clearly recognizing exactly what she was despite the years of careful human disguise. "We are only here to confirm a rumor," he said, "about a boy with unusual eyes." "There is no such boy here," Elena answered. The second scout, younger and more impatient than his companion, took a step closer, his gaze sweeping the street behind her, as though searching for signs of where a child might be hidden. "Lord Draven does not appreciate being lied to," he said. Elena held her ground, every muscle coiled and ready, though she knew with grim certainty that facing two trained Draven scouts alone, without the strength of a pack behind her, put her at a severe disadvantage. She had faced worse odds before, in the years she trained alongside her mother along the northern border, but she had never faced them with a child's safety hanging in the balance. "I have nothing more to say to you," she said. "Leave this town." The tension in the street stretched taut as a drawn bowstring, and for a long moment it seemed the confrontation might turn violent right there among the ordinary shopfronts of Brindlefall, where humans wandered past without any understanding of the danger walking among them. It was the sound of hooves, fast and hard against the packed dirt road, that finally broke the standoff. A rider appeared at the edge of town, moving with the kind of speed that immediately drew every eye in the street, human and wolf alike. As the rider drew closer, Elena felt her breath catch in her chest, for an entirely different reason than the danger standing in front of her. She would have known that shape, that bearing, that unmistakable presence anywhere, even after 7 long years. Cale Ashgrove reined his horse to a hard stop in the middle of the street, dismounting before the animal had fully settled, his golden eyes sweeping the scene before him with a fury that made even the two Draven scouts take an instinctive step backward. "Report to your master," Cale said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of an alpha king, "that if either of you sets foot near this town again, I will consider it an act of war against my own bloodline." The scouts exchanged a wary glance, clearly recognizing that whatever information Silas Draven had been chasing, their king had somehow arrived first, and with considerably more authority than either of them possessed to challenge. They retreated without another word, disappearing back toward the tree line, and, presumably, back toward whatever report they intended to carry north. Only once they were gone did Cale turn to face Elena directly, and the fury in his eyes softened into something far more complicated, something raw and uncertain, that Elena had never once seen on his face, during all the years she had known him. "You knew," she said, though it came out more as an accusation than a question. "Bram found the tracker's trail 3 days ago," Cale answered, his voice rough. "I have not slept since. I have not stopped riding since." Elena's hands curled into fists at her sides, 7 years of buried grief and anger rising to the surface all at once. "You did not come for me," she said. "You came because you learned you have a son." Cale flinched at that, though he did not look away. "I came," he said quietly, "because the moment I learned he existed, I understood that I had spent 7 years telling myself a lie about how little that night under the blood moon meant to me. I came, because whatever mistake I made in that hall 7 years ago, I will not let it cost either of you your lives, now that men like Silas Draven know the truth." Elena studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the same coldness she remembered from the night of her rejection, and finding instead only exhaustion, urgency, and something that looked disturbingly close to fear. "Where is he?" Cale asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "My son." Elena hesitated only a moment before answering, torn between 7 years of careful protection and the undeniable danger now standing in the middle of her town, wearing the face of the man who had once broken her heart, and now, apparently, intended to fight for the child he had never known he had. Safe, she said finally. For now. But that will not last if Silas Draven knows what those scouts came here to confirm. Cale's expression hardened with a resolve Elena remembered from the years before their bonding, before politics and council pressure had worn him down into someone who chose duty over everything else. Then we do not have much time, he said, before the Draven family decides that a threat this size is worth acting against directly. Rowan met his father for the first time in the small farmhouse kitchen belonging to the Hendricks family, standing very still beside Nadia, with his golden eyes fixed on the tall stranger, who had just walked through the door beside his mother. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, and Elena watched, breath held, as father and son studied each other across the small room. You have my eyes, Cale said finally, his voice unsteady, in a way Elena had never heard from him before, not even in the Great Hall 7 years ago. Mother says my eyes change color when I am angry, Rowan answered, with the blunt honesty of a child who had not yet learned to soften difficult truths for adults. A faint, startled laugh escaped Cale, though it carried more emotion than humor. Mine do the same thing, he said. Rowan considered this information with the same serious expression Elena had seen 100 times before, then took a small, cautious step forward. Are you the reason Mother is sad sometimes? He asked. The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, and Elena watched Cale's face crumble, just briefly, before he steadied himself and knelt down to bring his eyes level with his son's. Yes, Cale said simply, refusing to soften the truth the way a lesser man might have. I made a very poor choice a long time ago, before you were born, and it hurt your mother deeply. I am sorry for that, more than I know how to say, and I intend to spend a great deal of time trying to make it right, if she will allow me the chance. Rowan glanced toward his mother, as if seeking permission for something he did not yet have words to name, and Elena, throat tight with emotion she had spent 7 years refusing to feel, gave a small, uncertain nod. The moment was interrupted by the sound of Bram Walcott's voice from the doorway, sharp with urgency, that immediately pulled every adult in the room back to the danger still surrounding them. Riders on the southern road, Bram said, moving fast. Not Draven colors, but I do not like the timing. Cale rose immediately, the tenderness of a moment ago replaced instantly by the hard focus of a king assessing a threat. How many? He asked. 6, Bram answered. Possibly scouts for a larger group following behind. Elena's stomach tightened with fear, though years of training kept her voice steady. This town has no defenses against wolves, she said. If they mean to take Rowan by force, these people will not be able to stop them. Cale's jaw set with grim determination. Then we do not stay here to find out, he said. We return north, to my territory, where I can protect both of you properly. Elena's first instinct was refusal, the old fear of Ashgrove politics rising sharply at the suggestion of returning to the very place that had rejected her so publicly 7 years before. But looking at Rowan, standing close beside her now, with wide, uncertain eyes taking in every word of the adult conversation happening around him, she understood that pride and old wounds were luxuries she could no longer afford. If we go, she said finally, it will be on my terms. Rowan is not a piece to be moved across a board for the council's convenience. He is a child, and he will be treated as one, protected as one, regardless of whatever title the pack decides to place on him later. Cale met her gaze directly, something like respect flickering behind the urgency in his eyes. Agreed, he said. Whatever it takes to keep him safe, I will do it, even if it means standing against my own counsel to do so. Nadia, who had remained quiet through most of the exchange, stepped forward and pressed a small cloth bundle into Elena's hands, containing what little food and coin the farmhouse could spare on short notice. You go and keep that boy safe, she said, her voice thick with emotion she did not bother to hide. This bakery will be waiting for you both, whenever you decide to come home. Elena embraced the older woman tightly, 7 years of gratitude compressed into a single wordless hug, before turning to gather Rowan into her arms for the journey ahead. They left Brindlefall before nightfall, moving north under cover of darkness with Bram Walcott and 2 of Cale's most trusted guards providing careful protection, along roads that grew increasingly unfamiliar to Elena the further they traveled. Rowan, exhausted from the tension of the day, eventually fell asleep against his mother's shoulder, unaware that the 6 riders on the southern road had, in fact, been Draven scouts, and that Silas Draven, upon learning his target had already fled north under the king's own protection, would soon shift his strategy from quiet confirmation to something considerably more dangerous. Elena watched the unfamiliar landscape pass in the moonlight, one hand resting protectively over her sleeping son, the other unconsciously finding its way to the old, faded scar along her palm, where she had once cut herself during a training exercise with her mother, years before any of this had begun. She did not know what waited for them in the north, in the very halls where her heart had been broken 7 years before. She knew only that whatever came next, she would face it as she had faced everything since that night, with her son's safety as the only thing that truly mattered, and with a wary, uncertain hope that the man riding silently beside her might, this time, finally choose to stand and fight, rather than bow to pressures beyond his control. The knife came out of the darkness so quickly that Elena barely had time to shove Rowan behind her before the blade struck the stone wall, inches from where his head had been only a heartbeat before. They had been in the Ashgrove territory only 3 days, settled into a guest wing of the palace under guard, while Kale worked to prepare the council for the truth he intended to announce, and Elena had allowed herself, foolishly she now realized, to believe that the palace walls offered more safety than the open road had. "Guards!" she screamed, pulling Rowan tight against her chest, as a second figure emerged from the shadows of the corridor, moving with the trained precision of someone sent specifically to finish what the first blade had failed to accomplish. Bram Walcott arrived within seconds, moving faster than a wolf his age should have been able to move, tackling the attacker, before he could close the distance to Elena and Rowan. The struggle was brief and violent, ending with Bram pinning the intruder to the stone floor, while palace guards flooded the corridor from both directions, drawn by Elena's scream. Kale arrived moments later, still fastening his coat, his expression shifting from alarm to cold fury as he took in the scene, his son trembling but unharmed in Elena's arms, a knife embedded in the wall precisely where Rowan's head had been standing. "Who sent you?" Kale demanded, hauling the captured attacker up by the collar with barely restrained rage. The wolf, young and clearly terrified now that his mission had failed, said nothing, though his eyes flickered involuntarily toward the wing of the palace, where Odette Marlowe kept her private chambers, a detail that Bram Walcott, watching closely, did not miss. "Take him to the holding cells," Kale ordered his guards. "No one speaks to him except Bram and myself. No one." Once the corridor had cleared, Kale turned to Elena, his composure cracking for the first time since their reunion in Brindlefall. "I am sorry," he said, his voice raw. "I told myself these walls would protect you both. I was wrong, and it nearly cost me everything that matters." Elena, still shaking with adrenaline, held Rowan close and said nothing for a long moment, needing the silence simply to breathe. "I want to know who sent that man," she said finally, "and I think we both already suspect the answer." The investigation, led quietly by Bram over the following 2 days, confirmed exactly what the attacker's involuntary glance had suggested. The blade had been arranged not by Silas Draven, as Elena and Kale had first assumed, but by Odette Marlowe herself, whose 7 years of childless marriage to Kale had left her position at court increasingly fragile, and whose fear of being set aside, now that a true heir had appeared, had driven her to a decision she clearly regretted the moment palace guards dragged her before the council to answer for it. "I did what was necessary to protect my own place in this house," Odette said, standing before Kale, in the same great hall where Elena had once been publicly rejected, her voice defiant despite the guards flanking her on either side. 7 years I gave this marriage, 7 years of my own family's expectations resting on my shoulders, and the moment a child appears from outside this marriage, I am simply expected to disappear quietly into irrelevance." Kale's expression remained hard as stone. "You tried to have my son killed," he said. "There is no justification you can offer that changes what that means." Odette's composure finally broke, tears streaking down a face that had spent 7 years perfecting careful control. "I never wanted this marriage any more than you did," she said. "I only wanted some certainty that my years here would not be thrown away the moment something better arrived. I made a terrible choice, born from fear, and I know now there is no forgiveness that undoes it." The council chamber fell into uneasy silence, and Elena, standing quietly at the edge of the room, with Rowan's hand held tightly in her own, felt an unexpected flicker of sympathy beneath her lingering fear and anger. recognizing in Odette's desperation an echo of her own 7 years of loneliness, shaped by different circumstances but rooted in the same painful truth, that both women had been treated as pieces in a larger game neither of them had chosen to play. Cale, after a long and heavy silence, made his ruling. Odette Marlowe would be stripped of her position as his wife and exiled from Ashgrove territory, though he would not, given the mitigating truth of her own forced circumstances, pursue harsher punishment beyond that exile. The council murmured at the leniency, though none dared openly challenge their king in the aftermath of an attack against his own child. Silas Draven, watching the proceedings from his customary place among the council elders, said nothing throughout the entire hearing, his expression carefully neutral, though Elena, watching him closely from across the hall, recognized the same calculating stillness she had seen in Garrett Bly's description of the man's nephew weeks earlier in Brindlefall. Whatever Odette's failed attack had cost the Draven family's carefully laid plans, Silas Draven did not appear to consider the matter finished. That evening, after Rowan had finally been settled to sleep under the watchful protection of 2 guards Cale trusted absolutely, Elena found Cale alone, on the same balcony where, 7 years earlier, she had once stood beside him under a full moon, believing their bond would carry them through anything the world could throw against them. "This was not the peace I imagined finding when I decided to bring him here," she said quietly, joining him at the railing. Cale did not look at her immediately, his gaze fixed on the dark tree line beyond the palace walls. "I know," he said, "and I know that every danger you have faced since arriving here is a consequence of choices I made, both 7 years ago and in these past weeks. I do not expect you to trust these walls, or trust me, simply because I have said I am sorry." Elena studied his profile in the moonlight, searching for the coldness she remembered from the night of her rejection, and finding, instead, only exhaustion and a determination that reminded her painfully of the man she had once loved without reservation. "I do not know yet what I feel about being here," she admitted, "but I know that Rowan deserves the chance to know where he comes from, even if that knowledge comes with danger attached. I am willing to stay, for his sake, and see what this place can become, rather than what it once was." Cale finally turned to face her fully, something raw and hopeful breaking through the careful control he had maintained since her arrival. "That is more than I have any right to ask for," he said, "but it is more than I ever imagined I might receive." Neither of them spoke further that night, standing together in a silence that carried, for the first time in 7 long years, something closer to fragile possibility than open wound, though both of them understood, without needing to say it aloud, that Silas Draven's silence in the council chamber that morning had not been the silence of a man accepting defeat. The council chamber doors slammed shut, with enough force to rattle the torches along the walls, and Silas Draven rose from his seat, with a fury he had spent weeks carefully hiding, beneath calm words and patient smiles. "You would name an unproven, untrained boy as your heir over my own nephew's claim," Silas said, his voice echoing through the stone chamber. "A boy raised among humans, ignorant of pack law, ignorant of everything a future Alpha King must understand." Cale stood at the head of the long council table, unmoved by the older wolf's raised voice, 7 years of practiced restraint finally giving way to something firmer and more decisive than the council had seen from him in a long while. "He is my son, born of a bond the moon itself chose," Cale answered. "Ignorance of pack law is remedied through teaching, Silas, not through exclusion, and certainly not through the kind of quiet plotting your family has engaged in since the moment you learned of his existence." A murmur rippled through the gathered elders at the open accusation, and Silas's face darkened further, though he did not deny the charge outright. "Whatever concerns this council carries," Cale continued, "will be addressed properly, through the old traditions, not through knives in dark corridors, or scouts sent to threaten a child in a town that never asked to be part of pack politics. My son will be trained. He will be tested, as tradition demands of any heir whose claim is challenged. And he will earn his place, not simply be handed it, so that no one in this hall can say the throne was given without merit." The compromise, though grudging, settled the immediate tension in the chamber, and over the following weeks, Elena watched her son begin an education unlike anything Brindlefall could have offered him. Bram Walcott took personal charge of teaching Rowan pack history and the old laws, patient with the boy's endless questions, in a way that reminded Elena, more than once, of the gentleness her own mother had shown her during years of similar lessons. Cale himself took time each morning, despite the endless demands of the throne, to train Rowan in the basic discipline every young wolf needed: control of temper, control of shifting instincts, control of the strength that had once made him lift a shelf of flour sacks without thinking twice about who might be watching. Elena, meanwhile, found herself navigating a court that had not forgotten her public rejection 7 years earlier, and that watched her return with open curiosity, some of it kind, much of it not. She is the border girl who was cast aside. Elena overheard one noblewoman whisper to another during a formal gathering in the palace gardens, apparently unaware or unconcerned that Elena stood close enough to hear every word. Strange that the king suddenly finds her worthy again, now that she carries something he wants. The words stung more than Elena wanted to admit, striking too closely at fears she had carried since arriving. Fears that Cale's renewed attention had more to do with Rowan than with her, that the tenderness she had begun, cautiously, to notice returning between them, was simply duty dressed up as affection. She confronted Cale about it that same evening, finding him alone in the palace library, surrounded by old ledgers, detailing decades of pack law. "Tell me honestly," she said, closing the door behind her. "If Rowan did not exist, would you have come looking for me at all?" Cale set down the ledger he had been studying and met her gaze without hesitation. "I have asked myself that same question every night since Bram found the tracker's trail," he said, "and I do not have an answer that fully satisfies me, because the truth is tangled. I would like to believe I would have eventually found my way back to you regardless, that some part of me always regretted the choice I made in that hall, but I cannot prove that to you, Elena, and I will not insult you by pretending certainty I do not actually feel." Elena studied him for a long moment, unsettled but also, unexpectedly, grateful for the honesty, rather than a convenient reassurance designed simply to smooth over her doubts. "That answer is more honest than I expected," she said finally. "It is the only kind of answer I intend to give you from now on," Cale replied. "I spent 7 years letting other people's expectations decide what I said and did. I do not intend to spend the years ahead doing the same thing to you." Slowly, over the following weeks, something began rebuilding itself between them. Not the easy certainty of the bond they had once shared under the blood moon, but something more deliberate, built conversation by conversation, small kindness by small kindness, the way trust must always be rebuilt once it has been broken. Elena found herself, despite every guarded instinct telling her to remain cautious, beginning to trust Cale's steadiness again, watching him stand firm against council pressure, in ways he had once failed to do, watching him kneel patiently in the training yard, correcting Rowan's stance without ever raising his voice, watching him choose, again and again, to prioritize his son, and, increasingly, Elena herself, over the political convenience that had once cost them everything. Not everyone at court welcomed the change. Silas Draven's silence in the weeks following the council confrontation proved, exactly as Elena had feared, to be the silence of patience rather than surrender, and reports soon reached Bram Wolcott of Draven allies, quietly gathering support among the more traditional pack elders who still believed a boy raised among humans, however strong his blood, had no true claim to lead wolves who had spent their entire lives immersed in pack tradition. "The old laws provide one path forward that Silas cannot easily challenge," Bram told Cale and Elena one evening, as the three of them reviewed the ancient ledgers detailing succession tradition, the trial by blood. "If Rowan formally challenges any rival claim through the old ceremonial trial and wins, no elder in this pack, however traditional, can dispute his right to the throne afterward. It is binding, and it is absolute." Elena's stomach tightened at the phrase. Memories of her mother's stories about the old trials, dangerous tests of strength and skill that had claimed more than one young wolf's life over the centuries, when matched against a stronger, more experienced opponent. "He is 7 years old," she said. "Whatever this trial demands, surely tradition allows time for him to grow before facing it." Bram's expression turned grim. "Tradition allows the challenge to be raised whenever a rival claim exists," he said. "And Lucian Vale, Silas's nephew, has already quietly begun making noise among the elders about raising exactly that challenge, confident that a boy raised outside pack life will falter against a young wolf trained in combat since birth." Elena looked to Cale, searching his face for the same helpless resignation she remembered from 7 years ago, the moment he had bowed to council pressure rather than fight for what mattered most. She found, instead, only quiet, unshakable resolve. "Then we will make certain he does not falter," Cale said. "Whatever training Rowan needs, whatever time we have before Lucian forces this challenge forward, I will spend every hour of it preparing my son properly, and I will stand beside him through every step of that trial, exactly as I should have stood beside his mother 7 years ago." Lucian Vale formally raised his challenge before the full council 3 weeks later, standing tall and confident in the Great Hall, as he invoked the old trial by blood, demanding the right to test young Rowan's claim to the throne through the traditional ceremonial contest. Elena watched from the side of the hall, her heart pounding, as Cale accepted the challenge on his son's behalf, his voice carrying none of the doubt Elena herself felt twisting through her chest. Rowan stood beside his father, small but resolute, having spent the past 3 weeks training harder than Elena had ever seen a child train, absorbing every lesson Bram and Cale offered, with a focus that both worried and impressed her in equal measure. The trial itself, Bram had explained carefully in the days leading up to the challenge, was not a fight to the death, whatever old stories suggested. It was a formal test of control, speed, and discipline, held within a marked circle before the assembled pack, judged by 3 neutral elders, chosen from families outside both the Draven and Ashgrove bloodlines. The challenger and the claimant would face a series of tests, first a contest of controlled shifting under pressure, then a test of tracking skill through a prepared course, and finally a measured contest of strength within the circle, ending the moment either combatant yielded or was pinned beyond ability to continue. Serious injury was rare, the elders having refined the trial over centuries specifically to test worthiness, without demanding unnecessary bloodshed, though the tradition kept its old name as a reminder of how seriously the pack regarded any true challenge to the succession. Still, Elena spent the night before the trial unable to sleep, sitting beside Rowan's bed long after he had finally drifted off, watching her son's peaceful face and remembering, with a mother's aching clarity, that whatever the elders' careful rules intended, Lucian Vale was a fully trained adult wolf facing a 7-year-old boy who had only just begun learning what his own strength truly meant. "He will be fine," Cale said softly, finding her there in the dim candlelight. "I would not allow him to stand in that circle if I believed otherwise." "You cannot promise me that," Elena said, her voice tight with fear she had held back for weeks. "No," Cale admitted, "I cannot. But I can promise you that I will be standing at the edge of that circle throughout the entire trial, and if I see even the slightest sign that Lucian intends to cross the line the elders have set, I will end this myself, council tradition or not." The morning of the trial dawned clear and cold. The entire pack gathered in the wide training grounds outside the palace to witness the ceremony, elders seated at the front, younger wolves crowding behind them, all eyes fixed on the marked circle at the center of the field, where Rowan and Lucian would soon stand. Rowan looked impossibly small standing across from Lucian Vale as the trial began, the older wolf towering over him with an easy, confident smirk that made Elena's hands curl into fists at her sides. But as the first test began, a controlled shift, under the pressure of the elders' watchful eyes, Rowan surprised everyone gathered, including his own mother, by completing the transformation with a steadiness that spoke to months of quiet discipline learned in a small human bakery, long before he had ever known what true training meant. The tracking course, the second test, favored Rowan even more clearly, his instincts sharpened by years of listening for sounds and scents that ordinary children never noticed, honed further by weeks of formal instruction from Bram himself. He completed the course nearly a full minute faster than Lucian, drawing murmurs of surprise from the watching elders. The final test, the measured contest of strength within the circle, proved the most difficult. Lucian, larger and more experienced, pressed his advantage immediately, using his size to force Rowan back toward the circle's edge, again and again. Elena watched, breath held, hands gripping Cale's arm without fully realizing she had reached for him, as her son absorbed blow after careful, controlled blow, refusing to yield despite the clear disadvantage. Then, in a moment that would be retold throughout the pack for years afterward, Rowan planted his feet, drew on every lesson his father had spent weeks teaching him about balance and leverage rather than raw force, and turned Lucian's own momentum against him, sending the larger wolf stumbling past the circle's edge before he could recover his footing. The elders called the match immediately, the rules of the old trial clear on the matter of a combatant forced beyond the marked boundary. Rowan stood in the center of the circle, chest heaving, golden eyes bright with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief, as the pack erupted into stunned, gradually swelling applause. Lucian Vale, humiliated but bound by tradition to accept the result, offered a stiff, grudging bow toward the boy who had bested him, while Silas Draven, watching from the elders' section, sat utterly still, his careful composure finally, visibly cracking under the weight of a defeat he had not anticipated. Cale crossed the field before the applause had even fully settled, pulling his son into an embrace that spoke more clearly than any formal announcement could have of exactly how much this moment meant to him. Elena followed close behind, tears she no longer bothered to hide, streaming freely, as she wrapped her arms around both of them. 7 years of fear and loneliness finally, impossibly, giving way to something that felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like relief. The elders confirmed Rowan's claim formally before the entire assembled pack that same afternoon, declaring him, by the old and binding laws of the trial by blood, the undisputed heir to the Ashgrove throne. Silas Draven, stripped of any further legal avenue to challenge the succession, withdrew from the field in silence, his years of careful plotting undone, in a single, decisive morning, by a boy the council had once dismissed as unproven and untrained. That evening, as the pack celebrated with a feast unlike anything the territory had seen in years, Cale found a quiet moment to pull Elena aside from the noise and warmth of the great hall, leading her back out to the same balcony where they had once stood together under a very different set of circumstances. "He is remarkable," Cale said, watching through the open doors as Rowan, exhausted but glowing with pride, accepted congratulations from wolves who had never once looked at him with anything but suspicion until that very morning. "He gets his stubbornness from his mother," Elena said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through the tension she had carried for weeks. Cale turned to face her fully, his expression growing serious in a way that made Elena's heart quicken despite herself. "I have spent every day since Brindlefall trying to prove, through actions rather than words, that I am not the same man who stood in that hall 7 years ago and let fear of the council decide my life for me," he said. "Today, watching our son claim what should have always been his by right, I understood something I should have understood a long time ago. I do not simply want you here for Rowan's sake, Elena. I want you here because I love you, as completely and as foolishly as I did the night the moon first bound us together, and I have regretted every single day since that I let anything, even a crown, convince me to throw that away." Elena felt the old wound in her chest, the one that had never fully healed despite 7 years and half a kingdom's distance, finally begin to close over into something new, something built not on the fragile hope of a single moonlit night, but on weeks of watching this man choose her, and their son, again and again, even when the choice cost him politically, even when it would have been easier to simply let old arrangements stand. "I am not the same woman who left this territory 7 years ago either," she said quietly. "But I find, standing here now, that I am willing to discover who we might become together, if you are patient enough to let that happen slowly, this time, without a council or a crown deciding the terms for us." Cale reached for her hand, and this time, when their fingers intertwined beneath the same stars that had once witnessed their binding and, later, their rejection, Elena felt something steady settle in her chest, a promise neither of them spoke aloud, but both of them understood completely. The great hall had been transformed by the time the ceremony began. The same stone arches that had once witnessed Elena's public humiliation, now draped in banners of deep blue and silver, the colors of the Ashgrove bloodline, while every wolf in the territory gathered to witness something the pack had not seen in generations, a formal rebinding ceremony, held to correct a rejection that had never truly reflected the truth of the bond it claimed to sever. Elena stood at the center of the hall exactly where she had once stood 7 years before, though everything about the moment felt different now, the weight of grief replaced by something far lighter, far more certain. Rowan stood proudly beside her, dressed in formal colors befitting his newly confirmed status as heir, his golden eyes bright with an excitement he had not bothered to hide since waking that morning. Bram Walcott, given the honor of leading the ceremony in recognition of his decades of loyal service, called the hall to order, and the assembled elders, including several who had once smiled with quiet satisfaction the night of Elena's rejection, now watched with expressions ranging from solemn respect to open approval. Cale crossed the hall to stand before Elena, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the weight of everything that had brought them to this point settling between them in comfortable silence rather than old sorrow. 7 years ago, in this very hall, Cale began, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the gathered crowd. I made a choice, driven by fear and political pressure rather than truth. I called a bond chosen by the moon itself unworthy, and in doing so, I very nearly lost the two people who matter more to me than any throne, any council, or any crown this territory could offer. I stand here today to undo that wrong, fully, publicly, and without any condition placed upon it by anyone in this hall. He reached for Elena's hands, and this time, unlike the ceremony 7 years before, there was no council pressure hanging over the moment, no political alliance waiting to be secured through her humiliation instead of her honor. Elena Voss, Cale said, his voice steady and clear, I claim you as my true and rightful mate, not because tradition demands an heir, not because circumstance has brought us back together, but because I love you, completely and without reservation, and I intend to spend whatever years remain to me, proving that this claim will never again be broken by anything the world places in our path. Elena, her own voice thick with emotion she no longer felt any need to hide, answered with the traditional words her mother had once taught her, words she had never expected to speak again after that terrible night 7 years ago. I accept this claim, freely and completely, she said, and I offer my own in return, not out of duty, but because I have watched this man become someone worthy of the crown he carries, and someone I am proud to stand beside, in this hall and in every hall that follows. The old chant rose from the gathered elders, the same words spoken under the blood moon 8 years before, and this time, as the bond settled between them once more, golden and unbroken, Elena felt none of the fragile uncertainty of that first night. What settled into place now was something forged through hardship, tested by danger, and chosen deliberately, again and again, by two people who had learned, the hard way, exactly what it cost to let fear decide their future instead of their own hearts. The pack erupted into celebration that echoed long into the night, and Rowan, caught up in the joy of the moment, was lifted onto his father's shoulders by wolves who, only months before, had never known he existed, now cheering for the boy who would one day lead them, and for the mother whose strength had carried him safely to this hall, despite every danger the world had placed in her path. Later that night, standing once more on the balcony that had witnessed so much of their story, Elena watched the last of the celebration fires burning across the training grounds below, Rowan finally asleep after a day too full of excitement for even his boundless energy to sustain. Cale's arms settled comfortably around her shoulders in a way that felt, for the first time in 8 long years, entirely natural. I used to think the worst night of my life happened in that hall, Elena said quietly, watching the embers glow in the darkness. I spent years believing that rejection defined everything that came after it. And now? Cale asked softly. Now I think that night simply taught me how strong I could be when everything I loved was taken from me, Elena answered. And I think, standing here, that the strength I found in those years apart from you is exactly what allowed us to find our way back to something better than what we had before. Cale pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head, and together they stood in comfortable silence, watching over a kingdom that had, against every fear and every obstacle placed in its path, finally found its true alpha queen, and the son who would one day carry their story forward, not as a tale of rejection and loss, but as a testament to the strength it takes to reclaim what was nearly lost forever, and the love strong enough to make that reclaiming worth every hardship it demanded along the way.